This episode is brought to you by Ulta Beauty. Holiday cheer is here, and Ulta Beauty has gifts for everyone on your list. Treat them to fan-favorite gift sets from Charlotte Tilbury and Peach and Lily. Go all out with timeless fragrances from YSL, Ariana Grande, and Carolina Herrera. And you can never go wrong with an Ulta Beauty gift card. Head to Ulta Beauty for gifts that make the holidays brighter and even more beautiful. Ulta Beauty. Gifting happens here.
Introducing the U Rules of Value from Burger King. And U Rule number 1, you choose food you actually want. There's 7 tasty options, so try the $5 Duo or $7 Trio. Choose your deal. Price and participation vary. U.S. only. No substitutions. Restrictions apply.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
As I've said before, well, Parliament Hill can be a bit like high school with salaries. There's a lot of gossip, there's a lot of drama, and it's never ending, especially if your name is Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. We've been talking about this issue for a couple of weeks now. The floor crosser that happened on the day of the budget, Chris D'Entremont, Matt Genereux resigning or announcing that he would resign at a later date to be confirmed from the Conservative Party of Canada. Lots of speculation about more floor crossers. Now speculation about whether Pierre Poilievre can survive his leadership. A headline in a column in the Toronto Sun by Amanda Galbraith says Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives don't need a new leader, just a Valium. Let's talk about this in depth with someone who knows what it's like to come close to winning power, dealing with floor crossers, eventually getting power, and that is Ian Brodie. He is the former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He's been an academic at the University of Waterloo, the Calgary School of Public Policy. He's now with U.S. Public Affairs and joins me now in studio in Toronto. Ian, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Brian.
I couldn't think of somebody better to talk about this than you, because when you look at what has happened to Pierre Poilievre over the last little bit, I was like, well, you kind of went through this with Stephen Harper.
We went through this.
Give people a bit of background. You were an academic who decided, well, let's go test these theories I've got, and went into active politics with Stephen Harper. When was it? 2003, 2004?
Spring of 2003. So he was still leader of the Canadian Alliance at that point.
So you joined him post-leadership?
Post the first, yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. I had known Mr. Harper for several years before that, but when I went, and you talk about motivation, at that point, the objective was just to hold the party together, to not fall apart until we could get to an election campaign. Chrétien had won 3 big majorities in a row. There was still division between the Canadian Alliance and the PC party. I'd been working on the ground in the by-election in Perth Middlesex leading up to moving to Ottawa. The PC party came from behind and won that by-election after the Alliance had poured a lot of money and a lot of effort into it. And so at that point, the idea was really just, can we keep the place from falling apart long enough to fight an election campaign? And things turned out a little bit better than that, but that was the vibe that we had at the time when I moved there in 2003.
So 2004, the Conservative Party and the PC Party have merged.
That's right.
Stephen Harper is leader, runs for in the 2004 election against Paul Martin, loses. Some mistakes, could have gone another way.
Yes, that's right.
And then you were facing issues about, can the party stay together again? Spring 2005, you thought you were going to defeat the government, and then there was, ta-da, a floor crosser. So what was it like back then dealing with, both Belinda Stronach crossing the floor, Chuck Cadman standing up to vote to save the government, all of those things?
Yeah, it was a...
You're rubbing your eyes, and I'm guessing...
You're taking me back through...
You're
through
remembering
tough days of...
bad headaches.
Tough days of... Yeah, some days of some rough headaches. the 2004 campaign for the Conservatives was winnable. I guess we consoled ourselves that going into that election, Martin's people sort of advertised they were expecting to win 250 seats.
There's a whole book about it called Juggernaut. I always reminding everyone that they were going to win the biggest majority ever, is what they said.
Yes.
And they got a minority.
Yes, I have a remaindered copy of Juggernaut, and I left on the cover with the $1.99 price tag. We won't name the author, but from time to time when I run into her, I remind her that I got the book on sale. So we consoled ourselves with having reduced Martin to a minority. I think that wasn't an accomplishment, but victories within reach, and it kind of fell apart at the last minute. I would say it took Mr. Harper and the team probably a year to get over that. It was really kind of losing an election that you think you have a good chance of winning is tough.
Now, I'm going off memory. I think the election was spring 2004, right? Around May.
June of 2004.
June, okay.
Yeah, called in May for June. And so we were just starting to kind of get our feet underneath ourselves again when, as you say, Harper had gone out of his way to court the NDP, had gone out of his way to consolidate all the opposition parties against Martin. Had deliberately not polarized the electorate in order to drive, keep New Democrats voting NDP instead of driving them into the Liberal Party. And we thought we'd put together the parliamentary coalition to defeat the Martin government in June. And as you say, Belinda Stronach crossed the floor, and there were some other developments. We lost the vote by the narrowest of margins, and I was at home that morning that she crossed the floor. I was on paternity leave because our daughter had just been born. And we were supposed to have Mrs. Harper was supposed to come over that day to see the baby, and my wife came in while I was in the shower. She said, "Lorraine can't come. She's got Peter MacKay on the other phone. Belinda's crossed the floor. It's over. You prefer to go downtown." And I thought, this is terrible. I pretty much concluded this was terrible news. And then you walk into a caucus meeting and people are like, "She's abandoned us. Why?" And the party, which had been a bit, was new, bolted together, kind of Frankenstein's monster at a certain point, kind of congealed in hostility to her crossing the floor. It turned out to be the caucus meeting was quite, I don't want to say upbeat, but was quite focused on the task ahead.
It wasn't doom and gloom as you probably expected going in.
That's right. No, that's right. And Mr. Harper had warned people he thought that Belinda would cross the floor in advance. So that helped. He had sort of set the scene for this in advance. But the people
he had picked up on it, or
yeah, he sort of had this sense that that something else was going on. I don't think he had any definitive evidence of that, but he had the idea.
He had a gut check.
Absolutely. And so he told several people he thought she might go. And so when she ended up going, the people that supported her during the previous leadership race, they supported her because they were opposed to Harper. There's a coalition around her, not particularly because of her, but to stop him. And they gave that up that day pretty much. It was quite a remarkable caucus meeting, I remember. And then the summer was a summer of changes. Negotiations with the PCs, big change in overhaul in the office, overhaul of the campaign team, overhaul of the policy team. Some older PC hands came in. Some folks from provincial politics came in. So by September, there was a new team, and at the end of November that year, we succeeded in toppling the government and pushed for the Christmas election.
Before we get to that, I just want to ask you about something that I recall happening, and that is that there was a confidence vote that the Martin government lost in the spring of 2005, and they just ignored it.
Yeah.
Was that a legit confidence vote, or was it too cute by half?
At the time, I was upset because I thought it was pretty clear cut. In retrospect, you look back and think, if you're going to precipitate an election campaign, it really has to be on something that's pretty definitively a confidence vote.
So this was someone had moved an amendment
to a committee
report that was being voted on, and so that wasn't clean enough. But so you won that vote, but then lost. There was a straight up and down confidence motion that you lost because of Belinda crossing the floor and Chuck Cadman standing up in his jeans.
Right.
And then by the fall, things were good, and Stephen Harper won. So, what's your advice looking at what Pierre Poilievre's doing? And we haven't actually talked about this. I don't know how close you are with Pierre. I know you know him. I don't know if you chat with him and his team, but if you were chatting with them now, what would you be saying in light of Chris d'Entremont crossing the floor and Matt Genereux with this weird resignation thing happening?
Is advice I've given to a number of party leaders in similar types of situations. There's two things that in the media circuit we want to comment on that nonetheless you should not overreact to. One is a string of by-election losses. You get into a party, you lose a couple of by-elections in a row, and say, oh my God, we've lost 2 or 3 by-elections in a row, the sky's falling in. Don't overreact to by-elections. Whether you win them or lose them, they're sui generis, they're particular cases that may have no bearing on the next election campaign. And the other thing is a floor crossing. One floor crossing, you never know. It's a mix of personal animus, some enticements offered by the other side. Somebody's in a weak situation and they're riding. Maybe they're getting pressure from family or whatever. Look, I was sad to see Chris d'Entremont cross the floor. I know Chris, and he's a decent guy. I was sad to see him go, but again, don't overreact to a single floor crossing. If there are others, that's a more serious situation. But one, I don't think is, don't make any rash decisions based on a single floor crossing.
If the Liberals did when you recruited Wajid Khan.
Yes.
And right now, there's an awful lot of people listening who are saying, who is Wajid Khan?
Yes. Who was Wajid Khan?
And yet I remember, there was him, there was the gentleman from Thunder Bay,
yes.
Joe
Camuzzi, yes.
Joe Camuzzi, yes.
Yeah.
I remember standing in the foyer of the House of Commons as a very, happy Stephen Harper, looking like the cat that ate the canary, welcoming these people into his party. But in the grand scheme of things,
again, don't overreact.
It didn't amount to much, did it?
No, Joker was a great guy, but he was at the end of his political career. He was making a move just before the election campaign. A great guy. I was happy to have him on the team, but again, I hope the Liberals didn't overreact to that. David Emerson was a worse loss for them and a bigger pickup for the Conservatives. We can go into that if you want, but.
Let's talk about that because I was at Rideau Hall. I believe it was February 4th, 2006.
Yes, the 20th anniversary is coming up, February 6th.
I just got sent a notice that you guys are having a big party on that day. And so we're all assembled.
Right.
At Rideau Hall, as the media is, to cover the swearing in of the new cabinet. And David Emerson shows up, who had been the Liberal Trade Minister. Now, I never looked at David Emerson as a particularly liberal guy or a particularly conservative guy. He was a bureaucrat for a time who just wanted to serve his country.
Yeah.
So, it was a good pickup for you, but most of these are not as significant as that or as consequential as Belinda Stronach crossing the floor to save the day in a vote. So Chris d'Entremont, compared to those two, kind of small potatoes.
David Emerson was a big deal because, one, he's just a uber competent cabinet minister, and as you recall, was the Liberal industry minister, went to trade for us, and then when Maxime Bernier blew up his career as foreign minister, stepped into the foreign minister job, and it's hard to imagine somebody else who could have handled that situation better than David. So we were lucky to have him. But at the same time, taking David from the Liberal side, it was the end of the kind of the business guys wing of the BC Federal Liberal Party. And in fact, they've never recovered from that. That kind of Liberal Party connection to the Vancouver business community never recovered from David crossing the floor. At the time, I knew that was a possibility. It was one of the reasons why I was eager to have David. I found out later that he was a competent guy. But at the time, I thought, yes, if we entice him across the floor, that leaves, Hetty Fry will be the senior Liberal in British Columbia, and I like that situation for the Conservatives, with all great respect to Dr. Fry. And so that was uniquely consequential. I don't know whether Don Tourmont is going to play. You never know whether this is going to play a big role in the future or not. More difficult is when several people go to create kind of a dissident caucus, which has happened a couple of times in politics. My friend Monty Solberg was part of that against Stockwell Day. I don't really think of that as a floor crossing so much as going to create a new political party or a new
well, it was Monty Solberg and Chuck Strahl and several. I think there were a dozen of them that formed what they call them the
Democratic Representative Caucus.
Yeah, and they sat on their own. Do you I'm having some people whisper to me that they think that's going to happen with Poilievre and the Conservatives. I haven't seen any evidence of that. But maybe the people who are talking to me are only the ones who are loyal to the leader. But I've spoken to Conservative MPs in the past couple of weeks that I don't normally speak to. And I'm not picking up that there's going to be another bunch crossing or a group go sit as their own rump and leave the party. The closest I've heard, and it's all from Liberals, is they will feed you names like Michael Chon is crossing the floor. Michael Chon is not going to be a Liberal. It's not going to happen. Or one name that they floated to me, I talked to the MP, he said, I don't know why my name keeps coming up in the mix. I haven't even talked to any of them.
Right.
And you can get a sense when someone is telling you the truth or BSing you and appears to be telling me the truth. But have you heard about any of this? One Liberal was saying, well, there's a group of Conservatives that won't cross the floor, but will vote for the budget. Are you picking up any of this chatter?
Yes, but let me take a step back and put this into a slightly bigger picture here, because I think there's a context here that a lot of different strands going on at the same time. Mr. Carney's a little bit short of a majority, and he's introduced a budget without doing much of the groundwork to ensure that one of the opposition parties is okay with it. He's taken, I think, a strong hand. If I were in his position, I would have done the same thing, by the way. So that's not a criticism of Carney, just an observation that he didn't go through the normal process of sitting down with all the opposition leaders and giving them each, a bone in the budget to earn their support. So
there are smaller bones for individual ridings,
but not
that might attract individual MPs.
Yes. So that's a tough hand. On the other hand, we're in a tough situation. He's very close to a majority, and none of the parties can really afford an election right now. So I think that was the right chance to take. And now he's in sort of stare down with the opposition parties to see whether one of them is going to trigger an election campaign. That's on the one side. On the other side, we forget, but it's easy to forget. A year ago, Mr. Poilievre was 26 points ahead in the polls and lost the election. That creates unhappiness, discontent, confusion inside the Conservative caucus. Some people are unhappy about that, whether they think Mr. Poilievre has taken full responsibility or has made all the changes that are needed to make sure that doesn't happen again. There's a whole variety of different opinions there. That's normal in an opposition caucus, by the way. I've been through many opposition caucuses that are like this. That is normal, especially after you use an election, and I assume it's normal after you blow a 25-point lead, which doesn't happen too often. So, we're going through some political bends on that. As an old professor of mine used to say, you go up and down as you do when you're scuba diving, you can go through the bends. That's what the party's doing at the moment. And so I don't think you're going to see anybody else cross the floor or sit in some kind of rump, but there's obviously a debate going on inside. Mr. Poilievre faces a leadership review at the convention in January in Calgary, and you can never take those sorts of things for granted. I know he's got a campaign going on to secure the leadership review for him, which is good. In the end, I think the question will be, a year ago, Poilievre's personal support outstripped the Conservative Party's support, and so he pulled the Conservative Party up in the polls, as it were.
Now he's not.
Now he's a drag on the party's support in the polls. I think that's fairly clear across all the polls. The polls are still good. If there was an election, you don't know who'd win. The Conservatives are within striking distance in most of the polling.
So I'd agree with you. On personal popularity, he is not as popular as Mark Carney.
So what's he going to do about that?
But on the party support, there is a narrative among some in the media that, no one wants to vote for the Conservatives. They've fallen off the cliff. That's not accurate at all.
The political coalition that brought Pierre Poilievre to 43% or 42% in the last election is still there. It's the people who don't own anything, would like to get ahead in life and are going to have to take some chances to do that. And the people who supported Carney and made him prime minister at 44%, 45% or whatever it was, the people who own a house and want to protect what they have from Trump and everything else are still there. Not much has changed since April. This is still within striking distance.
My read of the polls, and I've been at this a long time like you, is that if an election were held, we're in the same position that we were April 28th.
That's right.
And depending on what the ballot question is, either side could win. Most likely a minority for either side.
Either side.
And so all this chatter, in my view, and I agree that there is real dissension within some parts of the party.
Sure.
But I'll say this. It's not a red Tory.
It's
not the old. The PC and the Alliance are pulling apart. Those divides don't exist in this modern day party, as far as I can tell. I have talked to folks in the party, both MPs and activists from various factions, because every party has factions. And you know what they're all upset about? They didn't win. There's no, he's too harsh, he's too... No, we didn't win. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, in particular, because for 2 years, it looked like it was a sure lock we were going to win. And so there's some disappointment on that. And I think between here and the leadership review in January, we're kind of waiting for Mr. Poilievre to say, okay, we get, cost of living, good issue. Debt out of control, good issue. Immigration, border control, drugs, so on and so forth, great. He's going to have to put together the picture of how he wins, how he takes the party to victory.
Well, if those are the ballot questions, I think he wins, albeit a minority. But if it's Trump, then Carney wins again.
Yeah.
We're kind of in a bit of stasis here.
Yeah, this is why I think, all the kerfuffle about an election campaign, it's not in anybody's interest right now. It's not in anybody's interest right now to have an election because it's not clear enough has changed.
What did Stephen Harper have to do? Did he have to do anything after that loss and the floor crossing? I mean, I'm sure there was some reflection.
Yes.
We've all heard that he's deep and dark and brooding and goes off, I'm sure those stories drove you nuts.
Yes.
But what kind of reflection did he do? And did he make changes internally? Was there a change in how he managed caucus or how he approached the media, how he dealt with candidates?
I don't think there was a big change in the way he handled caucus, because at this point the caucus was pretty united after blowing across the floor, very united. And so in a sense, he always had a good ear for what individual caucus members were saying about his leadership and the direction of the party. Actually, he's a pretty good listener, and I know he doesn't get credit for it, but he's a very good listener.
I've heard the stories from inside.
He paid close attention to what people were saying and tried to make sure that he had 80% support in caucus for everything he did, and by and large exceeded that. The difference was, if I'm going to go back into an election campaign, I need a team that can not just win an election campaign, that can govern. Having a campaign team, having a team that can govern and having preparations to govern takes the pressure off of you while you're campaigning, of doubt about what if this ends up in my lap, what am I going to do? No, it's under control. So he brought people on board to help with that. Absolutely. I need a better marketing team. I need somebody to help. I can't do all the speech writing and political marketing myself. I need some people to help out with that. So Patrick Moutard and a bunch of other Patrick's folks came on board and overhauled that part of the campaign. And then I need a campaign manager who can bring together a broader group of people across a broader part of the country. That's Doug Finley came on board as the campaign.
So did Doug not run the 2004 campaign?
No, Tom Flanagan did.
Oh, okay.
Tom's a friend of mine.
I've forgotten about that.
Tom's a friend of mine. But Tom left. Doug moved up into the campaign manager's job. Phil Murphy was chief of staff, left, and I stepped into the chief of staff's job. There were several, Jim Armour left, and a number of, a couple of others left, and then Patrick came on board on the kind of the big picture marketing stuff. Just decided he needed a different group and Marjorie LeBreton came on as a kind of a very close advisor. I can't leave out Marjorie, who played a huge role in just
And I remember when she was wearing a black armband because Stephen Harper had taken over her party.
Yeah, yes, yes.
And she came around.
I think I put it on the record before the merger. I might have said some unkind things about Marjorie Le Breton myself, but it turns out we got along great, and she's one of my favorite people in the party. And so, he just decided I need a different team here. I need to cover some blind spots. I need a higher level of aggression. And look, maybe this is advice that someone should give to Pierre Poilievre, that he needs a team that can help him win, that he can't do all of this himself, but that's an important part of governing too. If you want to be prime minister, you can't do it all yourself. Mr. Carney's making a good effort at it, but that runs out. Pick up the phone and talk to Doug Ford.
Oh yeah, let's pause there. Let's pause there. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get into that. What does Pierre need to do, based on your lessons that you learned, that Stephen Harper learned? What does Pierre Poilievre need to do to win? Because I think we could be heading for a spring election. Back in moments.
Introducing Meta Ray-Ban Display, the world's most advanced AI glasses. With a full color display built into the lens of the glasses, it's there when you need it and gone when you don't. Send and receive messages, translate or caption live conversations, collaborate with Meta AI, and more. Be one of the first to try Meta Ray-Ban Display. Visit meta.com/Meta Ray-Ban Display to book a demo and find your pair.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/US/leading edge.
Every leap in American history has needed breakthrough energy.
Ignition, liftoff.
Now, AI is here, and Chevron is working to power it. We're aiming to develop multi-gigawatt power plants near data centers, designed with future pathways to lower carbon intensity. AI gets the power it needs, communities get the jobs, and the grid stays strong. Powering AI today builds America's next superpower.
This is Stephen Harper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew until you would really happen. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
So just before we broke, you said Pierre Poilievre should pick up the phone and call Doug Ford. I'm not sure that's happened yet. And the election was April 28th. I have said since before the election, he should have been dealing with Doug Ford. He should have been dealing with Tim Houston. There's no relationship there. He should have worked with Jean Charest. Okay, well, look, you beat him soundly in the leadership, bring him in, have him help you in Quebec. There really was it's all about this guy. Even candidates and MPs were not showcased during the election. And I'm sure you've heard from some of them about that. How important is it to show you've got a team? Because I remember Stephen Harper bringing in, after 2004, I was on a radio panel with Michael Harris, the journalist from down east, and he said, their biggest problem is they don't have bench strength. Well, suddenly you recruited Jim Flaherty, you recruited John Baird, you recruited Tony Clement, you recruited Jim Prentice, you recruited people with solid experience.
Lawrence Cannon, yes.
Lawrence Cannon.
Yep.
So you could say, here's my team. And I think Pierre's got to show that he's got a team and it's not just him. Well,
there's two different things here. I mean, certainly, I think the team will come to the fore now because in defense of the campaign strategy at the time, as I said, Pierre's support was ahead of the parties. So you lead with what the strong point is. The strong point's Pierre. Okay, we're building this campaign around Pierre. Now that that's not the case anymore, it would be an odd election strategy not to feature the team rather than the leader, who's now a net drag on the party's support. But above and beyond that, He's campaigning to be prime minister of the country, right? Not to be opposition leader. He's not trying to be opposition leader again. Why go back to the same job if there's a campaign in the spring?
You get the job you audition for.
You get the job you audition for. And you know what? Who the prime minister of Canada has to deal with? The premier of Ontario. It doesn't matter who it is. The premier of Nova Scotia. It doesn't matter who it is.
So I'll tell you something that I was told, and this was not by someone on Ford's team. This was from someone on Poilievre's team, is that someone went to him and said, shouldn't you establish a relationship with Doug Ford? Because when you become prime minister, at this point, they're still in it's a foregone conclusion. This was before January 6th. I like to say Canada and the U.S. each had January 6th. They were just very different. That someone said, when you become prime minister, you're going to need to have a good relationship with Doug Ford. And his response was, no, when I'm prime minister, he'll need to have a good relationship with me. Those two need to sit down, break bread, go fishing, something.
Whatever it is. Look, I don't live in Ontario anymore, so I don't pay, day-to-day close attention to Ontario politics. So one thing I know is that Doug Ford's won 3 majority governments in a row. And that's not an accomplishment that's easy to achieve in Ontario. It hasn't since the 1960s. So obviously there's something there. There's some skill there. There's personal connections back and forth between the two teams. I would just get on with it. It doesn't have to be, look, Mr. Harper had dealings with provincial premiers, not all of whom he got along with personally. But it's a big, complicated country. The premiers have important roles to play. It turns out some of those relationships worked out pretty darn well. One of them, not a conservative, ended up as Mr. Harper's ambassador in Washington. Another one, not a conservative, ended up as his high commissioner in London. Those are people he didn't know at the time, but made an effort to get to know before he ran and then after he'd run. So, you're going to have, like, we're all adults here. It's a big country to run.
I know out west, Doug Ford is not popular, and there'd be a lot of conservatives in the west saying, well, he's just a liberal anyway, and ignore him. I think that's bad strategy. I think that you've got to work with people that are at least partly on your team. The old someone you agree with 80% of the time isn't your 20% enemy.
Look, I know there's people here in Ontario who think that Danielle Smith, my premier, is some kind of crazy separatist, which she's not. On the other hand,
I've said so.
Yeah, that's not true. But guess what? The prime minister's got to have a relationship with the premier of Alberta as well, regardless of who it is, regardless of what party it is. So just get on with that. You don't need those stories anyway during an election campaign. So make the phone call, and that's the end of the story. That you never talk. I spoke to Pierre Poilievre on the Thursday before the election was called, or whatever Ford said during the election campaign. Nobody needs any of that stuff.
Yeah, just be adults and move on. So, in terms of where Mark Carney's going, I'd like your assessment of that as someone who's been at the center of these big decisions. Right. He does appear to be running a near solo government.
Right.
There's a couple of ministers out there, Frankie Bubbles with the budget. You've got Tim Hodgson. But beyond that, do you get a sense he trusts his cabinet?
Look, part of Mr. Carney's challenge here is that he didn't come up through the party, right? I mean, he's dallied in and out of the party, knows people inside the party, but it's not like he has a long career inside the Liberal Party. He was a public servant. He was at the central bank. He didn't live in Canada for many of those years. And so he doesn't have the normal political team that you come to that job with, even if you've never been in government before. Mr. Harper had a team of people, like a press secretary, speechwriters, an executive assistant. Mr. Carney's team is Tim Hodgson, the natural resources minister, with whom he has this long-standing relationship.
Going back to Goldman Sachs.
And not really much else. So
he's apparently got a 30-year friendship with Jonathan Wilkinson, but he's trying to get rid of him.
So I think he's trying to find his way. Yeah, he brought Krista Friedland into his cabinet, and then that didn't work out, and so now she's off to some job with Ukraine or something. So sort of a slow motion separation from the Liberal Party, and we're led to believe there may be other cabinet departures coming. I think he's putting together a government as he goes along here because he doesn't have a big, long political tail of friends and allies that he can depend on. He's trying to figure it out. I think that's part of the problem of this government is that it really is 3 or 4 guys at the center who all sort of think like Carney and come from Carney-like backgrounds. And they don't really have much of a sense of what the country looks like from blue-collar Hamilton, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick perspective, and they haven't encountered that in their careers for quite some time. Mark starts with humble origins, but that's an awfully long time ago. And it's not like he's got some trusted folks around him who have a very good sense of how the country as a whole works. They have a very narrow view. So you have a budget that looks like, it was written by the IMF for the IMF Governing Council. The text is a little hard to parse. It's huge. It's a technically complicated budget. What's the storyline for the public? Not clear to me that anybody hold the presses. What are we going to tell people at the Sun and at the National Post about what this budget is about? It's not clear that anybody sort of pressed stop and said, what's the retail part of this?
I was listening to Scott Reid, who spent years on the other side with the Liberals, saying he's never seen such a bad budget rollout in terms of pre-positioning, in terms of having a storyline. The Martin guys perfected it. You guys picked it up and ran with it when you were in. You had a couple of stinker budgets. I was sure for them. But there was generally some kind of a storyline. And in this one, if Chris d'Entremont hadn't come along and crossed the floor, well, all we'd be talking about is $78.3 billion deficit.
Assuming for a moment that the d'Entremont thing didn't just unfold at the last minute because, part of the story was out, and once part of the story's out, the whole story's going to come out, so you might as well move.
So he actually, I wrote my first piece about this, is that the d'Entremont floor crossing story not only shocked the Conservative Party and the gallery, it shocked d'Entremont because he didn't realize that he was telling someone on the record, and so it broke before it was supposed to.
Yeah, planning a floor crossing to occur on the day of the budget, after you've presumably put some time and effort into designing the budget, rolling out the budget, pre-announcing parts of the budget.
I think it was supposed to happen the next day.
The next day. No, so all we've talked about, or all people have talked about, instead of what's in the budget, is the Chris d'Entremont crossing and problems inside the Conservative Party. It has saved Carney from having to talk in human terms to actual Main Street Canadians about what's in this budget, and it's a earth-changing budget with generational decisions in it. Okay. Tell me more. It's actually hard to tell you what's the next sentence in that story.
Yeah, there's nothing that's generational transformation that I found in this budget.
There's a lot of money set aside for future commitments. An extraordinary amount, like an almost obscene amount of money, all of which is going to be borrowed.
And there's a lot of claims that they will cut spending in the future, and I'm sorry, I don't believe any of you when you say that.
No, cutting spending requires some decisions that is difficult. It's just hard to not only to make the decisions, but to sell them to people and to implement them. So that's a challenge of governing. The problem is that we all believe, because he looks competent, and we're told he's competent, that Mark Carney has a plan for dealing with Trump and for rebuilding Canada for the future. When is the speech coming in which he fleshes that out?
Usually, he did one, and he said, "You're all going to have to sacrifice."
You're all going to have to say, okay.
That was Jimmy Carter Malay's moment.
How does the budget fit into that plan for the rebuilding of Canada of the future, where we can't depend on the United States? Is he able to put together a half-hour discussion, sit down with the editorial board at one of the newspapers, or do it with some YouTube host, or come to your podcast and explain it? We haven't seen that part of Carney's skill set yet, and I'm not entirely convinced that it's there.
He's done better at retail politics than I expected.
Absolutely.
He did better at campaigning than I expected. But you said, will he be able to explain this and sell it to the average Canadian? Well, my time covering him as bank governor, you really have to poke and prod him to get him to do that. It doesn't come to him.
And it
naturally.
Shouldn't to a central bank governor.
Yeah.
A retail touch for a central bank governor is usually there's a problem.
They're all used to dealing with like Theo from Bloomberg and Paul from the Wall Street Journal, and then I show up and can you tell me something basic for the News Talk 1010 crowd? But yeah, your quick assessment, and then I'll switch back to asking you about Pierre. Your quick assessment of this major projects office and how it's going, My big complaint, I keep saying, is that I want Mark Carney to live up to his own words of think big, act bigger, move at speeds not seen in generations. I'm just still waiting.
Yeah, look, there's a series of projects in that window that look like they were surefire bets anyway, and some projects that are years away from having a proposal.
The Sisson tungsten mine in New Brunswick, they made a big deal about approving it in 2017.
Yeah, no, we're now 8 years into the not constructing it phase of that project. Look, Bill C-5 and the Major Projects Office was designed to unlock some of the petrochemical wealth of the country for international markets, and so far, none of that's moved. I think the legislation was rushed through the legislative process, which is unfortunate. A good way of making a lot of mistakes on a big senior piece like this. And now major project proponents are sitting back just to see how it goes. Nobody wants to be the first one through that loop. And Carney has said he wants to hear from project proponents first, and then sit back and make decisions. I like this one. I don't like this one. I think if those big projects are going to get done, he has to lean into that more.
Or change the regulatory environment. I mean, he came to Toronto, told the Canadian Club that there's no problems with the regulation. That same day, Enbridge and TC Energy were holding calls on their third quarter results, talking about the problems with the regulatory situation in Canada.
Yeah.
They're investing billions in the U.S.
Look, the emissions cap, the fuel regulations, the tanker ban, and the environmental impact assessment legislation as a combination is a bullet aimed at the heart of private sector investment in Canada. We may not like to admit that, but it's true. And if there's going to be anything moved, that legislation is going to have to be repealed and replaced with something that's a lot easier for investors to deal with.
Well, I'm glad you said repeal and replace, because when I spoke to Premier Smith a couple of months ago, people just kept saying, well, she wants to repeal the law. And she said, no, there are valid parts within it. But as a whole, C-69 makes life inoperable for an awful lot of businesses, and not just oil. I mean, why is that tungsten mine that's been approved since 2017 not move forward? Because there are so many regulations that make it difficult, if not impossible, to go forward. Does all of this give Pierre Poilievre an opening? In terms of, it's one thing if it's just me saying Carney doesn't live up to his own hype. But if Susan Delacourt at the Toronto Star is saying that, if Andrew Coyne at the Globe and Mail saying that, if people on the street are talking to me about that, that's starting to resonate. I used to call it, when my kids were little, I'd called it like what breaks through with the other parents at the school bus while you're waiting. Right. And this appears to be breaking through a little bit, that he promises a lot but doesn't deliver.
I think a 6-month, two pieces here. A 6-month effort on what's he delivered, what's he delivered, what's he delivered, what's he delivered. It's a nice slogan that you want to push through enough that kids start chanting it in the back of the minivan while mom's driving them to school or while dad's driving them to school. I think it's easy enough to understand, and people can read the stories themselves about all the generational investments, blah, blah, blah. How's it affected your life? Nothing so far. And then on the other piece, has he fixed the immigration issue that the Trudeau government botched so badly? Not clear to me yet that the effect of that has been felt. That there's still people trying to get established in the labor market, including especially here in Southern Ontario, facing major employers that want to advertise for temporary foreign workers to take their jobs to fill their need for labor instead of Canadian kids or Canadians who are getting started in life. Mr. Poilievre was on that in September and then kind of backed away from that issue. I'm not exactly sure why. I think that's an evergreen issue as well and could come back. Those two are, in effect, the two potential very weak points that are easy to explain to somebody in Oshawa. They're easy to explain to somebody in Milton, Ontario, of what's going on, and a certain amount of patience for the public opinion to follow up to what I think Mr. Poilievre's right to point out here. I think that's in order, yeah.
If you were part of Mark Carney's team, I'm hearing the chatter of spring election.
Yes.
Replace some of his Trudeau holdovers, bring in his own team, run an election in the spring. Is that advice that you'd say, yeah, sounds good, boss?
I think at this stage he wants to have the option of doing that. The economic situation could be, look, if we lose a big Southern Ontario auto plant, one a month from now until April, do you want to have an April election after that?
No.
If there's, God forbid, 100,000 unemployed auto workers floating around Southern Ontario. I hope this does not happen, but that's a possibility that we have to confront. And then all the upstream and downstream jobs from parts manufacturers and service providers and so forth that go along with that. I mean, I lived in London for 6 years, I know what the impact of that industry is in that part of the world. If that's the future that we have to confront between here and April, hard to see an election campaign based on that, in particular because it's hard for me to imagine in April, Carney comes out and says, here are 5 pages from my budget in November that deal with the economic pain that we just went through. I don't see that. There's not an election campaign advertising program that's built around that. But if there's a pretty good deal with Mr. Trump, better than expected, if the economy is starting to recover at that point, if some of the major projects are starting to drive some investment in Canada, sure, yeah, you want to go at that point. To catch a new NDP leader, the Liberals did well in part because of the collapse of the NDP vote. You want to get the NDP before they have a chance to come back and chew a few more points out of the Liberal Party's support, and catch Mr. Poilievre before his show me the beef on the major projects catches wind.
Poilievre faces leadership review in January. Until the drama of late, I assumed it would be a slam dunk. Now I think, still pretty good, but it depends on how he deals with the next month. Do you see him winning it? And should he get another shot at an election, whether it's in the spring or later?
I think it's always a good idea to let a party leader learn something from an election loss, and to let them try again, see what they've learned. I mean, it's a risk, but your first election campaign as a national party leader is always a surprise. It's always tougher than you think it's going to be, and so the second time around, at least he'll be prepared for that. So I think that's worth it. A leadership review, and I was involved in a leadership review myself for Mr. Harper in 2005. You could never take a leadership review for granted. There's always surprises. There's always somebody out there campaigning against you, no matter how implausible the case is. There's some people out there working against Mr. Poilievre, and I know Mr. Poilievre's team is taking that possibility seriously. The question is, how does he motivate people to get to Calgary in the third week of, unless you're planning to go to Lake Louise afterwards for skiing? It's a bit of a hard sell.
I just assumed that they picked Calgary at the end of January to make sure that nobody came.
Well, the locals will be there. Of course, Doug Fort's having his convention at the same time, so there's counter-programming here in Ontario. But you've got to get enough people there that he secures that, and that's... Leadership campaigns and leadership reviews are always full of plots and counterplots and surprises, and people come out of the woodwork and so forth. I don't think they're taking any of that for granted, and I don't think they should. I think as we come to the year-end interviews and then into the pre-convention interviews, a picture of what Poilievre takes from the spring election campaign and what's going to be different about the next election campaign to put the party on track to win. That's the piece that I haven't quite seen yet. It is coming to be time for him to put some of that on the record.
Okay, so we'll end there. What does he need to do in terms of building that team? Does the leader's going to be the same? Is campaign manager going to be the same? A lot of fingers pointing at Jenny Burns, some I think fairly and some unfairly. I think some of the criticism is warranted. You're the campaign manager, you're going to wear it, but I think some of it is over the top. But does she get another shot?
Well, I think she's already announced she wants to step back, and I think that's probably a good idea. The party has quite a bit of talent. So, Jenny Byrne and Pierre Poilievre are, in effect, sort of a box set, so she's never going to be that far from him. I expect she'll be around and involved in the mix. But a bigger, broader election team, I think, is part of the formula for turning a disappointing loss into a win in the next election campaign. And there's lots of people around that can help with that.
All right. Ian Brodie, thanks so much. Enlightening.
Good to talk to you, Brian.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lidley, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please help us out by giving us a rating, leaving us a review, and hitting that subscribe button. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I Promised You. Castro would end up occupying a space in the Trudeau family similar to that of a beloved uncle. They went diving. They smoked cigars together. They gathered sea urchins for beach cookouts.
Informal talks at an island hideaway intensified their respect for each other, and their mutual enjoyment of skin diving added to the rapport.
In addition to a well-publicized 1976 summit meeting, Trudeau took 3 separate vacations to visit Castro after his time in politics had ended.
I can make, just one reference to Pierre Trudeau's sons to show the closeness of the relationship. The nickname that the Trudeau sons had for Fidel Castro was Papa Fidel. So that gives you an indication of the closeness of the bond that existed between a communist dictator, thorn in the side of every American administration for the past 50 years, and Pierre Trudeau.
When Trudeau's youngest son, Michel, died in an avalanche in 1998, Castro called the family in tears to express his condolences. As an 8-year-old, Michel had referred to Fidel Castro as his best friend. When Pierre died, Fidel declared 3 days of mourning in Cuba and flew to Montreal to act as an honorary pallbearer.
Every time Trudeau went down to Cuba, all the people in South Florida, the exiles, were thinking, why is this Western leader giving comfort to a murderous dictator, who is oppressing their people in Cuba, and saying, good things about Fidel Castro? And as I've mentioned, to have him in the pew at Trudeau's funeral in the front row, as a dignified person when he had been such a brutal leader, says more about Pierre Trudeau than it does about Fidel Castro.
Here's where we should probably touch on what Castro had done and what he was continuing to do while going on beach vacations with the Trudeau family. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.